Howdy, folks. Sapper here, aka Sean, and I'm bringing you World in Flames gameplay while the world is in flames. Is it any coincidence? Is there a coincidence that I happen to pick this title to play during these trying times? No, there's really no coincidence, but I think the name is kind of appropriate. So I'm not sure how to go about filming turns or whatever because I'm not 100% familiar with how a turn structure goes and everything. Yeah, I mean I've got charts and everything that tell you that, but this game is quite a bit more involved than some other games, and I don't think it's going to naturally lend itself to, like, for example, with the last game that I played, I could film while I was rolling dice and everything. This one I'm looking up too many rules, and there's a lot of stuff going on. So, let's see. Let me guess. The best situation is, all right. Here we go. So we're in the May June phase, and within May and June, so that's a 2 month block of time, right? So within May June, what we do is we have this turn. We got this turn sequence right here. So we do what's called impulses. So the Axis had the first impulse, and they do all of this stuff. And then they go to end of action. And you have to roll on this chart right here. And of course, the first couple you have NA, right? So you have to, if you roll, I think, less than that number right there, then basically this block of time here is over with, and then you will move to so this will move to the next 2 months worth of time. So the first four impulses, so basically the Axis goes, and then when they're done, then it goes over to the Allied, then it goes to the Axis, then it goes to the Allied. So you have an NA here, right? So we're not rolling on this chart until at least the fifth impulse. That way it gives both sides a couple of turns to do things. So the Axis have just completed their first impulse, and within that impulse, you like this chart that I made? Look at, it's my sequence of player aid, because ADG can't include one in a $280 game. So that I kind of showed you during the setup yesterday in the intro, all the stuff that's included, all the stuff that you get, right? It fills up that table right there. They can't give you a sequence of play. There is a sequence of play. So you've got one, right here, this little bitty thing, sequence of play. And then you do have one here in the back, right? But you're constantly using this rule book. You're constantly flipping through this rule book to look up rules and stuff. So you know what? It needs a standalone. It kind of needs a standalone player aid card. So I'm taking it upon myself to make one for myself. What I'll do, eventually I might get a little bit more professional. Maybe I'll go and type it, and when I finally go back to work, I'll print it out or something. But come on, guys. I mean, you've got all this stuff that you include in the game. You can't give me a sequence of play player aid card? Whatever. So anyway, that's just, off on a tangent, right? So now I'm doing the Allied side. I'm doing their impulse. So state of the game right now. Let's see here. Let's do. All right. So there's a lot of interesting mechanics in this game that I haven't ever seen in other war games. So there's, like, the impulse thing, I think is really cool. Each side gets to go, or one side goes, then you roll on the chart, and then the other side, depending on the roll, the other side might get a turn. Of course, each side's going to get a couple of turns, but after that, you don't know. It's one of those things. It's up in the air, right? and the weather affects that. Right now the weather is fair, so it's not going to affect anything. But you can kind of see when you use a unit. So you could probably see this one here. When you use a unit for something, sometimes those tweezers work good. So here's an unused aircraft. Then when you use it for anything, you flip it over, and you can't use it again. And then when it's your turn next time, I believe you'll have to make sure that it's in supply. And as long as it's in supply, you can flip it over. So that's really cool. If you get a really good result on an attack, then it might say only flip half of your units, or don't flip any of your units. And I got lucky with the Germans. I had one attack where none of the units got flipped, which doesn't mean that I can attack again, but it means when it comes around to the Axis impulse again, because they're not on their used side, I'll be able to use them again during the next impulse, which I think that's a really neat mechanic. But you can see here, the Netherlands have fallen to the Germans, and then, of course, Belgium has fallen to the Germans. No surprise there, right? That's kind of the way it goes in most games. And after looking at this map, you look at it, and you can, on this map, you can understand why the Germans went around the Maginot Line, right? So if you look here, you can see that's a fortification right there. But then you also have the Rhine River, which the Maginot Line kind of follows up to that point right there. And if I'm not mistaken, I would have to look at it again. Like all of these, all modifiers are cumulative. So if you're attacking a unit that's if you're attacking a unit that's in a fortification, you third your attack value. That's crazy, a third of it. But if you attack across a river, then you half your attack value. And I think that's cumulative. So I think you would third your attack value, and then you would half that third. So that, I mean, like, why would you you would have to have so many units, and your attack factors would have to be so high to even dare to attack across the Maginot Line. And because you have stacking limits in the game, you only have stacking limits of 2 land units. I mean, I think my strongest land unit might be a 7 or an 8. So the first number is the attack, and then the second number is movement. So, and then if you throw aircraft in there too, but you couldn't get attack factors high enough. Like maybe this one, right? Because you can attack it with this hex, this hex, this hex, and this hex. So you can attack it from 4 different sides. That one you might have some decent odds, but when you third something and then you half that third, that's crazy. So I understand, at least from a gameplay perspective, and most likely real life, why the Germans just went through the Netherlands and Belgium. So anyway, in typical opening move for the Germans in World War II, we're going through the Netherlands and Belgium. So that's kind of where we stand right now. And then, so now we have the Allies' turn, and we'll see what happens. I mean, it's going to be kind of tough because there's certain actions that you can take in the game. So, like during your turn, you declare whether you're going to take a naval action, an air action, a land action, a combination action, or you can do, it's not listed on here, you can pass. Well, I don't want to pass the Allies' turn, but the British have 4 battleships in port, and they have some units that I'd like to try to get across the English Channel. But if you take a naval action, then you have unlimited naval movement, unlimited naval transport, unlimited naval combat. But here's where it goes. You don't get any land movement, which the Allies, when you take an action, all major powers share that action. So France and England would share whatever action that I choose. So if I pick a naval action, then France can't do anything with their land units. No land attacks. So I like this. I think this is really interesting. There's a lot going on this table, which you have to constantly look at. So I'll probably have to take, let me see, does a land action give you naval? The land action gives you no naval movement. So I'm probably going to have to take a combination movement. And a combination movement will give you, so if you look there, a combination action gives you D for naval movement. And then you go down here and you look down this chart. So I would be able to do 2 naval moves if I'm the Commonwealth, and if I was France, I could do 1. France, I think, they have 1 transport. So I like the interesting choices that you have here. Lot going on, and I'm just slowly starting to dig into it. And here's something too. It's like France has these 2 units. I don't know if they're actually supposed to start here or they're actually supposed to start in France. Couldn't tell you. The setup doesn't really tell you where to put them. But I mean, that is a Moroccan infantry, and that is Senegal. So these 2 countries started, but I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns in the game, but I don't think those 2 infantry units are going to win the war for the Allies. So anyway, that's kind of the state of the game right now. Maybe after each impulse, I'll do an update, or maybe after each. There could be a lot going on in each 2-month turn, and I'll never remember all that. So maybe the best thing would be to do to kind of recap each impulse. I don't know yet, but anyway, that's where we stand so far. So stay tuned for more whiff goodness. All right, folks, I just finished up with the Allied impulse, so it is the second impulse of the May-June turn. Spent a lot of time reading stuff just to make sure if I wanted to like try to do some strategic bombing, or I don't know, like, so I was looking at like naval support. So the only country that has naval ships is Britain. Well, France has 1. They have a convoy, or I think it's a sea transport, naval transport, whatever it's called. But as far as warships go, it's only the UK. So they can do shore bombardment, but it has to be along a coastal hex. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it has to be in support of attack. So I was thinking about, hey, well, let me just bombard this guy right here. But if I don't have any units there that are conducting a ground attack, then at least that's the way I interpreted it. So these 4 battleships, are just kind of hanging out in the North Sea, not really doing a whole lot of anything. And then the French they had this Moroccan unit way down here. It started here. I think that's where he was supposed to be set up. It's really hard to, it says, focus. All right, well, let's see. Let's see if we can do this. So it's got FEC. So normally it's well, it's not a reserve unit. So I don't know. I put it here because it's got to go in a city, and then I just used rail movement and then loaded him up into the ship. So during the next naval phase for the Allies, they'll transport that Moroccan unit back to France. And then I've got this dude down here in Senegal, which this one, it actually shows that you can see that it's got Dakar written along the side. So that's where it gets set up, because it's a militia. It gets set up in the city. So that's the city of Dakar. That unit gets set up in Dakar. So I'm pretty sure what's that 1 5-3 infantry unit going to do? It's going to take, a couple turns to even get him to France. So whatever, I don't know. But the Allies chose a combined move because we needed to there was a couple units here actually I think they were in London. There was a couple of, there was an infantry unit and an armor unit in London, and I needed to get them from London to France. So I needed to do a combined move because Yeah, a land action doesn't allow you to do naval movement, so I had to do combined. If I did a naval action, then I couldn't do any land actions, and I wanted to try to do a combat. With the combined action, France and Britain only get one attack. And an attack is considered one stack, one hex of all the units in one hex. So France and England each got one. So I used this stack here and this stack here, used each one of their actions to attack this stack. And of course, it was pretty unsuccessful. I think the odds were only like 2 to 1. There was some ground support that was going on, so the French ended up losing a fighter and they ended up losing an infantry unit out of the whole deal. And nothing happened to that unit there, or that stack. So we have one fighter, we have a 7-3 infantry, and a 7-6 armor there. So the Allies tried to slow down the Germans, but actually just ended up hurting themselves. So that is it for the time being. That we still have 2 more impulses that we can do in a minimum of 2 before I have to start rolling and finding out if the turn ends. So that's it for the time being, folks. It's definitely slow going because I have to keep reading the rules and rereading and cross-checking things and looking up on Board Game Geek, and like, you know, there was some of the ground support rules for aircraft were super confusing. Like you have your bombers, which I completely understand, but then you can have escorts, which can fly, a fighter escort, which can fly its entire movement. Then you have combat air patrols, which you can use to support your bombing run or your ground support. And then you have interceptors, and interceptors can only fly half their movement. And I don't understand, it doesn't say, it's not clear in the rules whether, you know, you have to use interceptors. So why wouldn't you just use escorts every time instead of interceptors? I think that might be just and then the combat air patrol, just why aren't we just using escorts the whole time? I don't know. It's like, to me, the combat air patrols and the escorts can a plane. So here we go. All right. Yep. You're not going to cooperate, are you? All right. So that 3 in the circle is the range of that plane. So basically 3 hexes. So if I fly a combat air patrol or I escort a bomber, then my range for that plane is 3. If I use it as an interceptor, then I half that range. So that range would be 1.5. Of course, in this game, you round up if it's 0.5 or higher, you round up. If it's lower than 0.5, then you round down. So basically, he has a range of 2. He has a range of 2 to the intercept point, but he can still fly his full range back. Again, why is that level of detail there, or that little bit of minutia included? I don't know. So if I use him as an interceptor, my range is limited. But the function of, at least in my mind, the function of a combat air patrol or the function of an escort is the same thing as an interceptor. So if there's anybody out there that knows the answer to that question, hey, that would be awesome. But in my mind, I just can't wrap my head around it. And where was this dude? I think he was there. No, he was in 1, 2, 3. Where the heck was that guy? I'm going to have to go back and look probably in the video and find out where he was. But anyway, that's just one of the things that was super confusing. The difference between a combat air patrol, an escort, and an interceptor. Because in my mind, an interceptor would be something that you would use to, oh, hey, there's bombers coming in. Let's see if we can head them off, right? We can intercept these bombers. But the rules even show it where, watch, I'll probably Your opponent flies combat air patrols to potential targets, hexes. You fly select attacking bombers, escorting fighters, and combat air patrol to potential target hexes. Your opponent flies intercepting fighters or both bombers and escorting fighters to the target hexes. Then you fly intercepting fighters. So see, that whole mess right there is just super confusing. But anyway, I managed to get through it, right? Spent a lot of time trying to figure it out, and then after a while, you're just like, whatever. I'm just going to pretend they're all escorts. If it's not a bomber and it's a fighter flying, then the fighters are flying an escort mission, and that way I get the full range out of it. Problem solved. Anyway, that's it for that. There's Whiff for you. So just imagine this on a global scale. When I have the Eastern and Western Europe maps, the Eastern Western Asia maps, I don't have the Africa map yet, the Scandinavian map add-on, so it's going to get crazy, folks. So just bear with me. Anyway, until next time, peace.